Welcome to this week's discussion on the age-related changes in muscle. Let's begin this discussion with some definitions. Early childhood is prior to 5 years of age. Middle childhood is 5 to 8 years of age. Pre-adolescence is from 9 years of age until 13. Adolescence is from 14 years of age until 17 or 18 years of age. When the term childhood is used, it is broadly referring to early and middle childhood and the beginning of pre-adolescence. Remember, the number of muscle fibers present at birth does not change much during growth or aging. The number is genetically determined, and there is considerable variability between individuals. During early and middle childhood, the shape of the muscle remains the same, but the muscles do grow in size. When bone grows in length, this stretches the muscle, which stimulates muscle growth. During growth, prior to and during puberty, children require more calories and more protein per unit body weight than adults. Children have greater energy expenditure, which is why they need more calories and therefore why they generate more heat than adults. Have you ever noticed that children seem to be able to play endlessly in cold water? I've watched young children play in Lake Tahoe well into the sunset hours in water that I didn't even want to dip my toe in. The amount of energy needed per kilogram of body weight by a child to walk or run is much greater than that of an adult. The difference can be as much as 30%. The theory for this increased energy expenditure is the lack of coordinated movement. I'm sure you've noticed how children, particularly young children, appear to be unsteady. Even during middle childhood, you might notice a lack of coordination. For agonist muscles to function efficiently, the antagonist muscle must relax enough to allow for flowing movement. In children, the antagonist muscles do not relax, and instead of agonist contraction with antagonist relaxation, there is co-contraction, which takes more energy. Children also have a quicker stride, which makes them less efficient. Ultimately, these all contribute to generating more heat. It's very important for children to maintain a positive nitrogen balance. This means that there is more nitrogen going into the body than going out of the body. As you learned in basic nutrition, nitrogen loss means that protein has been broken down and the amino acids are wasted. During periods of growth, such as childhood, the protein going into the body, that's protein intake from food, is being utilized to support growth. Therefore, more protein is consumed than wasted. To support growth, protein intake is incredibly important. Children aged 7 to 10 years should consume 1.1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram per day. Now, some studies recommend up to 1.3 grams per kilogram. Children 11 to 14 need 1 gram per kilogram per day. Remember, the recommendation for adults is 0.8 grams per kilogram per day. And after puberty, the recommendations are the same as adults. As we discussed last week, children preferentially utilize stored fat, suggesting that they are designed for aerobic exercise, more so than anaerobic exercise. Although small carbohydrate snacks are recommended for children during sporting activities, there's not much research to support these recommendations. Because children utilize more energy and generate more heat, they are more prone to heat-related illnesses during exercise. Children are also more prone to dehydration. Parents and coaches, particularly, should encourage children to drink frequently when exercising. Sweet drinks encourage fluid consumption, and the recommendation is a 6% carbohydrate solution, drinking every 15 minutes when exercising. Now, when children are not engaged in activity, sweet drinks should be discouraged. The one micronutrient that I'm going to bring attention to is vitamin D. And I know I've talked a lot about vitamin D in this course. Vitamin D plays a specific role in muscle development in children by stimulating myoblast proliferation and differentiation. When children don't obtain enough sunlight or vitamin D in their diet, muscle development is impaired. These graphs are from a study that evaluated power and force in 99 girls and their relationship to vitamin D levels. The graph on the left shows power, and on the right shows force, and it's in relationship to vitamin D. You can appreciate the upward trend in both muscle power and force with the higher vitamin D levels. The authors concluded that muscle contractility was impacted by vitamin D status in girls. Keep in mind that muscle strength, muscle mass, and contractility impact bone growth during adolescence. Optimum muscle strength is important in reaching peak bone mass. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about vitamin D later. You know that resistance training is recommended by the American College of Sports Medicine for adults, but resistance training in children is a controversial topic. Should we encourage children to lift weights? Research in middle childhood and pre-adolescence has not demonstrated reduced injury risk with preventative strength training. In addition, strength training has not been shown to enhance sports performance in children. Some are concerned about injuries from strength training in childhood because of the occurrence of muscle strains as a result of improper use of equipment. But research demonstrates that injuries are rare in children when proper form is used, and that there are no adverse effects on growth in children nor on the cardiovascular system with proper resistance training. In late middle childhood to pre-adolescence, a properly structured resistance training program has been shown to improve strength. With proper form and instruction, resistance training will improve sport-specific skills and postural control in children. In middle childhood and pre-adolescence, there is no muscle hypertrophy associated with the increased strength. This leads us to believe that the increase in strength is due to neural adaptations. In order to prevent injury, appropriate instruction, strict training, and proper form during resistance training is essential. Children gain their balance and postural control by 7 to 8 years of age. It would be difficult to lift weights or learn appropriate technique prior to this age. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends starting resistance training programs after the age of 7 years. The AAOP emphasizes the importance of educating children on proper technique. The growth spurt starts around 11 years for girls and 13 for boys. Prior to this age, girls are generally taller than boys, but boys catch up, then surpass girls during adolescence. Boys have a quicker gain in muscle tissue, and girls have a quicker gain in fat tissue. By the end of puberty, boys have about 1.5 times as much muscle as girls. This graph is a representation of the gains in fat and lean mass in boys and girls. Girls are represented in red and boys in blue. The dashed line represents lean mass as a percent of body weight, and the continuous line represents fat mass as a percent of body weight. Note the decline in lean mass in girls and the gain in fat mass. In boys, you can see the sharp increase in lean mass and the steady decline of fat mass. What I want to point out is that this is a percent of total mass, so it's important to note that total mass increases in both boys and girls. Total muscle mass increases in both boys and girls. In addition, both boys and girls will gain muscle into their 20s, particularly boys. It's just at a much slower rate. We learned earlier that growth hormone and insulin-like growth factor, IGF, work together to regulate muscle growth. Recall that testosterone, which increases in boys during puberty, stimulates myofibril hypertrophy. The basic shape of the muscle is maintained during most of growth for boys and girls, but toward the end of puberty, boys have an increase in width of their muscles, resulting in greater muscle mass in boys and girls. You can see in the graph that boys have greater grip force and greater muscle area compared to girls. Note that muscle area in boys steadily increases from about the age of 11 to 12 to about 16 or 17, up to 20 and then tapering off. Although we can appreciate the same sharper rise from about 11 to 12 to 16 or 17 in grip force, notice how much more force increases during this period. There are greater gains in force than muscle area. This demonstrates that muscle hypertrophy is not the only factor impacting strength. Note that there are rises in muscle area and grip force in girls, but the gains are not as great. Strength training can be beneficial for adolescent athletes. Strength training that focuses on areas subjected to overuse have been shown to decrease injury rates in adolescents, such as rotator cuff or ACL injuries. After puberty, both boys and girls will obtain greater mass and strength gains from resistance training than pre-pubertal children because of the higher androgen levels. Hypertrophy can occur as a result of strength training in adolescents who are post-pubertal. Keep in mind that weightlifting is just one form of resistance training. Several important changes occur in muscle as we age. These changes can be seen in the performance of elite athletes. By looking at the world records of athletes at different ages, we can see that speed declines as we age. It appears that muscle aging begins sometime in our mid-20s to early 30s. These changes are in strength, structure, size, fiber type, and contractile characteristics. On average, people will gain about 1 pound a year after the age of 25 years. This weight is primarily fat, which you can see represented here. Yet muscle mass is lost at a rate of 1% per year after the age of 30. But the greater declines occur toward the end of the fifth decade. From age 20 to 80, there is a 30% reduction in muscle mass. There's a preferential loss of type 2 fibers in comparison to type 1 fibers with age. This means that as total muscle mass declines, type 1 fibers are relatively spared, while there is a loss of type 2 fibers. Sarcopenia is the age-related loss of muscle mass and associated with loss of muscle function. Sarcopenia is characterized by a decrease in the size of muscle, but also a decrease in the quality of muscle tissue. This means that muscle fibers are replaced by connective tissue and fat, which impacts muscle metabolism and results in loss of muscle function. Illnesses can accelerate muscle mass loss, and older individuals are generally impacted more by illness than younger individuals. Animal studies have demonstrated that contraction-induced muscle damage is greater in older rodents than in younger rodents, and this has been replicated in unconditioned older adults. Preconditioned aging muscles, and that's referring to muscles in older adults who engage in physical activity, like this couple here. They experience less exercise-induced damage than unconditioned muscle. Animal studies have also demonstrated that conditioned aging muscles are less susceptible to cellular damage from oxidative stress, which we'll cover later. This tells us that physical activity has a protective effect. Aging muscle has a longer repair and recovery time after exercise-induced damage. There's some evidence to suggest that aged unconditioned muscles have lower levels of ATP and creatine phosphate. Now, ATP and creatine phosphate in muscle are our immediate energy sources for contraction. There's also lower levels of glycogen. Aging may impact the rate of glycogen resynthesis, and this directly impacts the rate of recovery. Let's return to this illustration. Recall that insulin and exercise stimulate the GLUT4 transporter to transport glucose into the muscle, which is then stored as glycogen. Exercise-induced damage occurs more with age, specifically from an eccentric exercise, and this impairs the GLUT4 transporter. In addition, GLUT4 transporters decline with age. This means that the more muscle damage from exercise, the less efficiently glucose is transported into the cell, which impacts the rate of glycogen resynthesis, inhibiting or impairing recovery. When recovery and repair are slowed in aging muscles, this limits training adaptations. When muscle mass is lost, there are two major impacts: loss of muscle strength and loss of protein stores. When strength is lost, it is more difficult to perform daily activities of living. The more muscle mass that is lost, and the more strength lost, the less independent the individual becomes. Activities most impacted by sarcopenia include rising from a chair or bed, walking or standing. These activities substantially impact daily activities, such as getting out of bed, going to the bathroom, and making meals. When muscle mass is lost, it reduces the protein stores that can become a source of needed energy in acute illness. During illness, there is a loss of dietary intake, and the body compensates by utilizing muscle protein, essentially breaking down protein to amino acids to be used as necessary substrates to cope with illness and for energy needed if necessary. When muscle mass is lost, muscle strength is lost. In this graph, you can see the gain in muscle mass and strength during adolescence. This peaks out around 30 years of age. And then we can follow the blue line for an individual who is able to maintain their muscle mass. Although there is a decline, it is not as dramatically impacting their ability to function. When an individual cannot maintain their muscle mass, they dip into what's called the disability threshold. This means that their loss of strength has impacted their function to such a degree that they cannot live independently. There are many factors that contribute to the development of sarcopenia. This slide shows both sarcopenia and cachexia. Cachexia is the unintentional weight loss with substantial muscle atrophy, generally associated with illness, such as cancer or AIDS. Sarcopenia and cachexia are commonly compared, so you will see the two conditions mentioned often together. You can see the multiple factors which contribute to the development of sarcopenia. The hormones we learned about which stimulate muscle growth slowly decline with age. Testosterone, vitamin D, which we'll talk about later in more detail, growth hormone, and IGF all decrease as we age. There's an age-related loss of spinal motor neurons, as well as a decrease in the number of neurotransmitters. The reduction of motor neurons is directly associated with a reduction in muscle fiber number and size. There's usually a decrease in physical activity, which impacts muscle mass, as well as nutritional factors, particularly protein intake, which decreases the amino acid pool. Inflammatory cytokines are signaling molecules that stimulate low-grade inflammation. There's a growing body of research indicating a role of inflammatory cytokines in the development of sarcopenia. The factors that contribute to the development of sarcopenia and the subsequent loss of muscle power are loss of type 2 fibers, diminished neuromuscular function, changes in the architecture of the muscle, hormonal alterations, decreased amino acid uptake resulting in decreased protein synthesis, increased inflammatory cytokines, and muscle fat infiltration, called IMAT. I-M-A-T. Muscle fat infiltration is the deposition of adipose tissue in muscle. There's an association between age and inactivity and intramuscular fat deposits. On this graph, IMAT stands for intermuscular adipose tissue. Inter, I-N-T-E-R, muscular, means between muscle bundles, not within the muscle cell. This is not the same as triglycerides stored within the muscle that can be a useful source of energy. Intermuscular adipose tissue, IMAT, has metabolic implications and is associated with insulin resistance and diabetes. What's interesting is 4 weeks of immobilization in a young athlete can result in deposits of intermuscular adipose tissue. You can see the increase of intermuscular adipose tissue associated with increasing age. Additional factors that contribute to the development of sarcopenia include a decrease in the vessels which supply muscle, a decrease in the number of satellite cells within the muscle, making it more difficult to regenerate after injury, and alterations to the mitochondria. Estrogen impacts muscle strength, and the age-related decline in estrogen after menopause in women is linked to a decline in muscle strength. Contractile force in muscle depends on myosin strongly binding to actin. Myosin has both weak and strong binding states, and the theory is that estrogen impacts the strong binding structural state of myosin. Essentially, the loss of estrogen results in a structural change in myosin, preventing a strong binding state that decreases contractile force in muscle. The exact mechanism of this interaction is unclear. Postmenopausal women who take hormone replacement therapy don't have the same losses in muscle strength as those who don't take hormone replacement therapy. Diagnosing sarcopenia is difficult because measuring skeletal mass accurately is challenging. DEXA is commonly used, but this becomes inaccurate when abdominal fat is present and somewhat costly. Bioelectrical impedance can be accurate, although hydration status can alter results and availability is an issue. CT and MRI are more accurate, but they're extremely expensive. Body measurements such as height, weight, measuring body fat using calipers and laboratory values such as creatinine, clearance, and this is different than creatine, are both affordable, but they are not exact. Body measurements in particular have large error rates. We learned about DEXA scans for assessing bone mass, but DEXA scans can also measure fat mass, lean mass, in addition to bone mineral content. Excess abdominal fat mass can decrease the accuracy, but when DEXA is combined with a gait speed test, practical assessment of muscle mass is more accurate. The European Working Group on Sarcopenia in Older People, EDGSOP, has outlined a practical clinical algorithm for diagnosing sarcopenia. So let's go through this algorithm. We're going to start with an older individual, greater than 65 years of age. Although I want to point out that younger individuals can develop sarcopenia, but remember, it's mostly associated with age. If sarcopenia is suspected, the first test is to measure gait speed, which is walking speed. If gait speed is greater than 0.8 meters per second, grip strength is measured. There are specific devices designed to measure grip strength. If grip strength is normal, there is no sarcopenia. At an annual physical exam, a physician will do a crude manual test of grip strength, and if it feels weak, they may consider a more calculated measurement of grip strength and measure gait speed. If grip strength is low, then a DEXA scan is ordered to measure muscle mass, and this will either rule in or rule out sarcopenia. If gait speed is initially low, less than 0.8 meters per second, a DEXA scan is ordered, and this will either rule in or rule out sarcopenia. Individuals who are obese and sarcopenic have worse outcomes than those who are sarcopenic but not obese. The term for this is the fat frail. It's much more difficult to lift more body weight than less body weight. The loss of muscle and gain of fat is generally due to a steady decline in physical activity. The prevention of weight gain, specifically gaining fat mass, is essential. Before we talk about nutritional impact, I want to return to factors that stimulate muscle protein synthesis. There are four key components: growth factors, essential amino acid, the cell's energy charge, and insulin. Their action is through mTOR. mTOR stands for mammalian target of rapamycin. mTOR is a signaling pathway that processes various body signals, such as growth factors, nutrients, and energy, to either stimulate muscle protein synthesis or stimulate muscle breakdown. As we learned last week, insulin stimulates the GLUT4 transporter, which transports glucose into the muscle cell. By stimulating the GLUT4 transporter, insulin indirectly stimulates mTOR pathway, which increases muscle protein synthesis. One really important factor here is that insulin only stimulates muscle protein synthesis when amino acids are available, essential amino acids. So these two are synergistic. The availability of essential amino acids, which are the building blocks for protein, is the key to stimulating protein synthesis. If there are no essential amino acids, no new protein can be formed. Now, all amino acids will stimulate insulin release from the pancreas. But leucine in particular has a more profound effect, which stimulates insulin, which stimulates mTOR pathway, which stimulates muscle protein synthesis. Insulin also inhibits muscle protein breakdown. Many postulate this is why whey protein from milk stimulates protein synthesis more than other proteins. Whey protein contains more leucine, in addition to being fairly quickly digested and absorbed. The cell's energy charge, or the cell's charge, also the energy, relates to how much ATP is in the muscle cell. When the body is exercising, the amount of ATP goes down. And that's because the ATP is being utilized. Therefore, the energy charge of the cell goes down. Now, this actually will inhibit the mTOR pathway, hence muscle protein synthesis. This is because it takes a lot of energy to build proteins, and the muscle is focused on utilizing its ATP on muscle contraction. But after exercise, ATP is quickly regenerated, and the cell's charge goes up. This stimulates muscle protein synthesis. As you remember from last week, we learned that 30 minutes after exercise, within that 30 minutes after exercise, muscle protein synthesis is rapid. Three key factors related to nutrition and the development of sarcopenia are protein intake, vitamin D, and antioxidants. Quality protein provides essential amino acids necessary for muscle protein synthesis. Some quality protein sources that provide essential amino acids include eggs, low-fat milk, yogurt, hard cheese, cottage cheese, soy-based products, and legumes. Lean meat is an excellent source of essential amino acids, but remember, many elderly individuals have difficulty chewing, so these need to be chopped or minced. And legumes in particular are an excellent source of protein. The anabolic response of protein intake is blunted in older individuals. And this means that the same amount of protein intake for a younger individual will not stimulate protein synthesis in an older individual. To compensate for this blunted response, protein recommendations should be increased. There's no formal recommendation for increasing protein after the age 65 years, but research suggests that 1 to 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight per day for older adults. Now, before recommending a higher protein intake, always ask about kidney function. Although intakes up to 2 grams per kilogram per day do not impair renal function in a healthy individual, those with renal impairment can experience problems. So meals for the elderly should contain about 20 to 25 grams of quality protein. As vitamin D levels decline, muscle strength declines. Aging is associated with a decrease in vitamin D production in the skin. Older individuals typically spend less time outside, wearing more clothing, which results in less sun exposure. The result is lower serum vitamin D levels. Muscle is a target organ for vitamin D, which means that there are vitamin D receptors in the muscle. When vitamin D binds to VDR, the vitamin D receptor, new protein synthesis is induced. Vitamin D also modulates the handling of calcium by the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The exact mechanism for this interaction is unclear. Vitamin D also stimulates muscle cell proliferation and growth. We learned earlier this semester that IGF stimulates protein synthesis as well as amino acid uptake. When vitamin D binds to VDR, it stimulates the production of IGF, which therefore has an indirect effect also on protein synthesis and stimulates amino acid uptake. With increasing age, there is associated decrease in the number of vitamin D receptors. Although decreased muscle strength is associated with a decrease in vitamin D levels, not all studies have shown that supplementation of vitamin D alone increases muscle strength. One reason may be that the vitamin D receptors decrease with age. If the receptor isn't available to bind the vitamin D, it doesn't matter how much vitamin D is in the system. Muscle protein synthesis will not be induced to the same degree. Some studies have shown positive benefits with vitamin D supplementation. Studies that have supplemented with vitamin D in the aged population have found that muscle fiber size increases with vitamin D supplementation. The effect is noted particularly in type 2 fibers. Supplementation of 1,000 to 2,000 international units a day is an acceptable recommendation, but all sarcopenic patients have to have their vitamin D levels measured. And therapy, which can be sometimes up to 50,000 international units per week, should be based on their serum vitamin D levels and determined by their physician. Despite a lack of vitamin D receptors, supplementation in individuals with low vitamin D levels is beneficial. The free radical theory of aging is a theory that we age due to free radical damage to our cellular structures. Free radicals are encountered in our environment and are generated by metabolic reactions. Notice how mitochondria is one of the major producers of free radicals. Free radicals are highly reactive molecules, and they cause oxidative damage to cellular structures. Cellular structures that can be damaged include DNA, protein, and lipids. When these structures are damaged, this leads to improper cell function and cell death. When mitochondrial DNA is damaged by free radicals and abnormalities occur in the electron transport system, this leads to reduced calcium uptake by the sarcoplasmic reticulum, along with irreversible cell damage, which leads to muscle cell death. It's important for seniors and the elderly to increase the amounts of natural sources of antioxidants. Some foods high in antioxidants include colorful berries such as cranberries, blueberries, strawberries, and blackberries, red kidney and pinto beans, artichokes, sweet potatoes and russet potatoes, walnuts, pistachios, and pecans. It's controversial on whether or not antioxidant supplementation is beneficial. It's always best to obtain nutrients from food sources when possible. I have an article providing rationale for this theory in your optional reading. We learned earlier this semester that muscles can adapt. Muscle mass and strength can be gained even in individuals in their 80s and 90s. Muscle will grow when it's stressed, and there are greater strength gains in the elderly from resistance training than aerobic exercise, such as walking or cycling. Remember that type 2 fibers are preferentially lost, and resistance training results in training adaptations that increase type 2 fibers. It's very important that all seniors have a physical exam clearing them for resistance training prior to engaging in this type of activity. Some cardiac conditions will prevent individuals from engaging in resistance training programs. Programs should be tailored to fit the individual, because older adults may have osteoarthritis or osteoporosis. When engaging in resistance training, intensity is important. In fact, it's recommended for seniors to complete 6 to 8 repetitions, with the last repetition leading to failure. This means that the individual must start with enough weight initially that the muscle fatigues enough after 6 or 8 repetitions. If the elderly individual can perform 12 reps with the same weight, it's too light. Keep in mind that 10 pounds could lead to failure after 6 reps in an 85-year-old. The American College of Sports Medicine recommends 1 to 2 sets 2 to 3 times a week. There's also some research that suggests that high-velocity training is also beneficial for seniors. It's never too late to start. No individual is too old for interventions. To finish up here, I want to mention that although the GLUT4 transporter decreases with age, short-term exercise training as little as 1 week can increase muscle GLUT4 concentrations in adults. Remember, GLUT4 facilitates the transport of glucose into the muscle to be used for energy and stored for glycogen, enhancing recovery and training adaptations. Remember that decreased glycogen resynthesis impairs recovery and limits training adaptations. Resistance training will also increase muscle protein synthesis, and 12 weeks of resistance training will decrease intermuscular adipose tissue.